Okay, we're live. Welcome back. Welcome if you are new. Going to talk about the role of chaos in how we address the global heating and or climate change problems that we are now confronted with. So I've talked about chaos in the past, a year ago or something, in a video with a similar title to this one, in which case I was talking about the chaos that is sort of inherent or embedded in the climate system itself. It makes it difficult to predict what will happen. We experience that kind of chaos when we notice that things that we thought would be happening 100 years from now are happening now. When things that we thought were predictable spin out, and suddenly we don't understand what's happening, and so on. So this kind of behavior is completely expected with the Earth system dynamics and the Earth climate, because it is dominated by chaotic elements. And this is the chaos I'm talking about here is specifically mathematical chaos. So chaos theory, the actual study of numerical chaos and how systems like three-body systems, can start out looking predictable and then become completely unpredictable. That's the three-body problem. The three-body problem in physics and all kinds of systems that exhibit three-body characteristics are inherently unpredictable. Now, the unpredictability can adopt a set of patterns like Lorentz attractors and things like that. So, it's not like mathematical chaos isn't completely chaotic like you would think. Mathematical chaos even has beautiful patterns, which you would say are, oh, well, that's not chaos then. Okay, but it is, because there's no way to predict in a mathematically chaotic system. There is no way to predict where in that pattern you will ever be. Your location within that pattern, that three-body, the physical results of you moving in a chaotic three-body system is that you will never know where you're going to be at any time in the future based on any time in the past. There's no way you can predict from where you were in the past where you will be in the future. It just doesn't work because it's chaotic. There's a pattern, but it's where you will be in that pattern is unpredictable. There's a pattern, and your location in that pattern is completely random and chaotic. So that's why our Earth system dynamics really cannot be sufficiently predicted. We are going to be surprised always, and never in a good way. We will never be surprised in a good way. Why is it always a bad way? Simply stated, and I'm going to get off this topic in a moment. Simply stated, we are evolved and adapted, and even really our expectations, just our daily personal expectations. All of these things are focused on a set of narrow defined probabilities of things happening. It will be dry, it will be wet, but the range of dry to wet to dry to wet, that range is understood. Okay, it will be windy. There'll be a little bit of wind, there'll be a lot of wind, but the range in which the winds will vary on a random way are understood and accepted. Okay, our clothing, the amount of buttons we have, we don't expect winds that will rip all your clothes off. Those exist, by the way, like tornadoes, right? Will just rip all your clothing off. But that's not what we expect on a daily basis. We expect the winds to be such that these buttons, this many of them held in a certain way with a certain type of thread into a certain type of cloth, this will survive a windy day, not a tornado day, which will strip all your clothing off. but a windy day is fine. So we've actually patterned everything about our lives, like the thread count in the cloth, the type of thread, the type of fibers used, right? How many threads pass through the middle of a button, how strong is the button, how big is the buttonhole, how strong is the buttonhole. Billions of things like this, billions of things are calculated, or at least evolved, mechanistically through experience, to be okay. And then the Earth's dynamic system starts to change. So when it changes, every type of change will be detrimental. We're not ready for any change. We're not ready for the winds to become tornadic, but we're also not ready for the winds to just go away. Zero winds would be really bad. I can't even tell you how bad that would be. If the winds on the Earth just stopped suddenly, it would be cataclysmic. It would really be the end of the world. It might even be the end of all life on Earth, practically. All complex life on Earth could easily end if the wind simply stopped, or nearly so. No joke, no joke. There's a range in which these things are expected to happen, that all life has evolved for certain things to happen within a range. And departures from that range are simply fatal. Just right away. And yet the Earth dynamic system is a system dominated by chaotic elements. That doesn't mean it's always chaotic. Right now, it has landed in a valley of predictability, and so long as we're rolling around inside this valley, then we're fine. We go up one side of the valley, we roll it back down. We go up the other side of the valley, we roll back down. We're rolling around inside. This is what we call our averages. But just outside this valley, you go over a ridge, and then you'll never come back. You'll never come back to this point. You'll never come back to this valley where we go rock up this way, rock down that way, come back this way. Well, we go over this ridge, we go into another place. It's another dynamic equilibrium. What the hell happens over there? Man, we have no idea. But someday, some fine day, we're going to, go over that ridge and go down on that other side. Or we'll go over the ridge this way and go down on that other side. That's what happens in chaotic systems. They're called tipping points. That's what people call them. But that's what they are. They're dynamic equilibria. And when you exceed the range that keeps you in that dynamic spot, that sweet spot, when you exceed the range, you go over a ridge and you go down into another thing. That's typical mathematical chaos. Strange attractors, things like this, where the mathematics, suddenly you're all over here in another domain. And you may never come back to this domain, or you may come back from a different direction, and you find yourself back where you were, but then you're right back out again. So that's mathematical chaos. That's not what I'm talking about today. One of the problems we all face is fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are a problem. Fossil fuels are a strange attractor. We have allowed our entire existence. I mean, it's been okay, right? But nevertheless, we've allowed our entire existence, everything we know, everything we see, everything we feel, everything we eat, everything you say is based on the consumption of fossil fuels. We can't even imagine a world without fossil fuels. We've been doing fossil fuels for so long, and fossil fuels are so deeply embedded in everything we do that the thought of not doing with fossil fuels is like not breathing, not drinking, not eating. You can think about it, think, yeah, not eating, I guess I could do that, but that would be bad, so I guess I won't. Not breathing, well, people can hold their breath, but people die from holding their breath, so I'm not going to do that. So you can think about it, but you can't really do it. You can't really deviate from these things that are really critical in your existence. And one of those things that has become critical, which it wasn't always, in fact, for most of human history, we didn't even know fossil fuels existed, but it has become critical in the last, really, maybe 50 years, 100, maybe 100 years, right? For 100 years, fossil fuels have become absolutely critical. Can't live without them. Not even a joke. Well, I mean, it is kind of a joke. It's like, how'd you let that happen? Wow, that's weird. You're a weirdo that you let yourself become dependent for life on something like that. Oh, something that, by the way, you don't even have access to unless some corporation is over there digging it out of the ground for you and willing to sell it to you. You gave people that kind of power over you? Really? You did that? Wow. Phew, I guess you didn't think too long and hard about that, did you? No, you didn't. And so here we all are. We're all dependent on fossil fuels, all of us. 8,000 million humans, with the exception of a few undiscovered Amazon tribesmen, right? A few, what, 2,000 people maybe? The Lapps in Finland, maybe some of the Lapps are dependent on fossil fuels. The Inuit are. The Inuit in Alaska, where of course there's a lot of oil. The Inuit in Alaska are now completely, totally dependent on fossil fuels. They have big trucks and they have snowmobiles and they have boats with four-stroke engines and the whole thing. And they still whale and they seal and then whatnot, but they don't even have their dogs anymore. Their sled dogs, they got rid of those. They keep them maybe as pets or something, but they don't have sled dogs. What are you talking about? They got trucks, they got airplanes, helicopters. Okay, the Inuit, who used to live completely free of fossil fuels, are now up to their eyeballs in fossil fuels. So how many people are on this planet aren't really completely embedded in fossil fuels? 100,000, maybe 100,000 people. The rest of us are completely embedded in fossil fuels, totally dependent for everything, every single thing. I say this in almost every video. You are completely dependent from the day you were conceived, not born, conceived. From the day you are conceived until a couple of weeks after you die, you are completely, your body, your existence on this planet is completely dependent on fossil fuels. How'd that happen? Wow, that's not good. You can provide yourself with oxygen. Problem solved. You can provide yourself with water. There's a river right down I could go down there and drink that river water. If it rains, I can collect it in a barrel, right? Problem solved. You can grow food. You can do a lot of things. But you cannot provide yourself with fossil fuels. Period. Period. Absolutely period. Full stop. You can't do it. And yet you are completely dependent for all your fossil fuels for everything you do, for these fabrics, for this microphone, for the lighting, for the water delivery and the electricity delivery and the food deliveries at my Whole Foods and my Trader Joe's and my Target and everything, all this, all of it, my shoes, coffee, tea, green tea, everything, the glasses I use to be able to do anything, right? Power tools, consumables, everything. All of it, lumber to build things, to build habitat, lumber, everything comes from thousands of miles, and hundreds of thousands of people are involved in the creation, delivery of these things. Enormous factories build every single thing that I can see. Everything I see here, all of it. I'm looking, every single thing. Okay, that spider web. I will allow that spider web, that cobweb up there, is not dependent on a factory. But that's it. That's the only thing in this house that isn't dependent on huge factories thousands of miles away in foreign countries, shipping containers everywhere, trucks, everything is fossil fuels, all of it, including my food and my water and my electricity and my sewer treatment and everything else, all of that. And we allowed that to happen. Wow. Damn. Now we've had some really good things come out of that. Again, the fabric, the tea, the microphone, the lighting, the electricity, the food is really great. No one really has to go hungry. But really, I mean, certainly not in this country. There's plenty of food. They'll even give you the money to go get the food if you don't have money. There's really no reason for anybody in this country to go hungry. People do, okay, but that's because, well, here in California, nobody does. California is wealthy and enlightened and progressive, and we just make sure people don't go hungry. That's it. We got control over that. We'll make sure nobody goes hungry. You're hungry? Here, have some money. Here, have an EBT card. Go get some food. You can't figure it out? We'll have someone take you down there and help you figure it out, okay? No reason to go hungry. You can walk into all kinds of places and they'll feed you food. That's how it should be. Fossil fuels made all that possible. I'm 65 years old, 200 years ago, I'd be lucky if I lived to 55. And 200 years before that, I'd be lucky if I lived to 50, 45. Work was hard, lots of accidents. We didn't have a germ theory of disease. We didn't have treatments. There were wars in which people would be swept up and taken off to war and never come back. Yeah, we just kind of don't have that anymore. So living to be 65, 75, 85, not a problem, not a stretch, not a stretch at all. Fossil fuels. Yeah, me likey, you likey. We like these. And yet we can't have them. We can't have them. Now, another thing I mention here a lot is that because we can't have fossil fuels, we can't. Why can't we? Okay, do I have to mention this? All right, fine, I'll do it. Removing fossil fuels in the ground. We remove them for the purpose of burning them. We want the energy out. So we set them on fire and we get the energy out, the heat generally. And using the heat energy, we can make steam. We can drive pistons in an engine. We can have we can use fossil fuels for transportation to generate electricity, move goods, move money around, all this kind of stuff. So, but when we combust them, we release into the atmosphere many things, but primarily of interest here on this channel is the CO2. You take the fossil fuels out of the ground, you set them on fire to get the energy out and to work with it. You, as a byproduct, you release the CO2 in the atmosphere. The CO2 in the atmosphere is naturally present, and it's a good thing. It creates what's called the greenhouse effect, along with methane and nitrous oxides and some other things. The greenhouse effect keeps the world, the Earth, warmer than it would normally be. Right? We'd be at or below freezing all the time without the greenhouse effect. And there are lots of frozen planets in our solar system. Mars, for example, is somewhat Earth-like, not entirely, and the differences are actually very important, but it's somewhat Earth-like, and it's frozen. It's so frozen, it's so cold on Mars that even the carbon dioxide freezes. Wow, crazy, right? So we could be frozen, but we're not because of the greenhouse effect, of which carbon dioxide is an important contributor to the greenhouse effect. But when we burn fossil fuels and release the CO2 in the atmosphere and it goes in the atmosphere, then it enhances the greenhouse effect. There's more CO2 than there was a century ago or 10 centuries ago. And so that enhances the greenhouse effect. And when you enhance the greenhouse effect, you trap more heat, which could be a good thing. I'm not saying that's automatically a bad thing, but that's what you're doing. Did you plan on doing that? Well, that's what you're doing. Is that a good thing? I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing for some people. Maybe it's a bad thing for everybody. We just don't know. So you've got your CO2 in the atmosphere that you put there by burning fossil fuels. It enhances the greenhouse effect. The planet gets warmer. And then what? Well, you melt all the ice eventually. It may take a while, but it doesn't matter. We're going to melt all the ice, and that causes sea level rise and probably messes around with ocean currents like the AMOC and some other things, possibly the ENSO, which isn't a circulation pattern. But anyway, it's another thing. It's an Earth system thing. We can end up messing with the ENSO. We could end up messing with the AMOC, the oceanic circulation patterns in general. Who knows what we're going to do if we melt all the ice? Also, the atmosphere gets hotter. So it can evaporate more moisture from bodies of water or from forests like the Amazon rainforest. You can evaporate more moisture from the plants. And in any case, you get more moisture in the atmosphere. And when you have more moisture in the atmosphere, it transports some distance and it rains out. Okay, that's the water cycle. So that means you could get more evaporation, which means the plants might end up on stress. And then once you transport that moisture, you could get more rainfall. So these are things we expect from global heating. It's more evaporation, more rainfall, which sounds like the opposite, but it's not. They're tied together. Okay, they're the same thing. More melting of the ice, uh, more melting of the permafrost, which is going to have all kinds of effects. Can't even really guess all of them. We can guess some of them, but not all of them, and all these kinds of things. So yeah, sure, we've got microphones and lights and electric vehicles and electric toothbrushes and all that stuff, but we have these other deleterious effects. So we're kind of all holding our breath, wondering what's going to happen next, right? And some of us are saying, and I would say this, that Yes, we had a great run with fossil fuels. We did a lot of amazing, went to the moon, right? We did a lot of amazing things, and we would like to keep those things. Yes, we would. We don't want to lose them. We would like everyone to be happy going forward. That would be nice, right? People are happy now, uh, happier. They're not as hungry. They're not as frightened. They're not as cold or as impoverished or whatever as they might have been without fossil fuels. So we had our fossil fuels. We made a really wonderful world. We discovered penicillin and the germ theory of disease and a bunch of other things. And now that kind of has to stop. Our fossil fuel consumption sort of needs to stop. And that's just a sad reality. Could we have managed it better if we had just realized what was going to happen, if we just kept willy nilly doing this? Maybe we could have managed better. I don't know. Well, we didn't. And we got all these great gains from burning fossil fuels. And now we've kind of fucked up, right? We kind of messed it up. And now the Earth system is changing out from under us. We don't really recognize some of these conditions anymore. It's doubtful that people will be able to live everywhere that they live now, meaning habitable zones are going to move, they're going to disappear. Some places that are habitable today will become uninhabitable in the future, maybe even this summer. I mean, really, these things could start to happen anytime. We really just don't know. We can't say. And my answer to everything is, when's that going to happen? Next week. I start thinking that way. Doesn't matter that it's next week or not. Doesn't matter if you know Spain becomes uninhabitable next week. What if it becomes uninhabitable next year? Is that any better? Or how about even next decade? Is Spain becoming uninhabitable due to heat and fire and drought 10 years from now? Is that still okay? Because it's the topic. Spain becoming uninhabitable, period. When? Doesn't matter when. Next week, yes, possibly. Can't rule it out. But even 10 years from now, even 100 years from now, Spain becomes uninhabitable for all practical purposes. Is that still okay? If it's 100 years from now? So people will say, yeah, actually that is. Even the Spanish would probably say, oh, it's 100 years from now? Oh, that's fine. I'm 50 years old. 100 years from now? Yeah, even my grandkids are died of old age probably. So what do I care? That's how people think. But other people are saying, okay, we'll be lucky if it's 100 years from now, more likely 10 years from now. So we have to start thinking about life without fossil fuels. Now, I want to say right up front, if we were to stop burning fossil fuels today, which we can't do, but just for shits and giggles, let's just pretend we stopped burning fossil fuels today. Does that mean that Spain doesn't become uninhabitable 100 years from now or 10 years from now? No, it doesn't. That could still happen. That's my wife. I'm not going to take this call. It could still happen. I mean, that's the situation we're in now. We've let this go so far that we may be at a point of no return. But we probably should still stop burning fossil fuels now. And there's been a lot of talk about that. We've got the Kyoto protocols. We've got the Paris Climate Accords. We're up to 28 COPs, right? The Conference of Parties. They won't even tell you what they're talking about, but they're talking about climate change, which they shouldn't be talking about. They should be talking about global heating, but they talk about climate change, whatever that really means. And they want climate actions. And, the oil-rich companies are now hosting the COPs. And so that's nice, I guess. Whatever. So we're not going to do it, right? We're going to have all these talks and we're going to, hold hands and sing kumbaya and nothing's going to happen. We should stop burning fossil fuels, but we can't because, I won't have my lights and I won't have my food at Whole Foods and I won't have my, modern healthcare and I won't have education. And I won't have electricity and I won't have internet. And I won't have anything without fossil fuels because that's true. You won't. You also won't have 8,000 million people. In a world prior to this massive unfettered consumption of fossil fuels, the Earth had maybe at most 600 million people, and that number of people was already destroying a lot of the planet. One of the reasons the English came to the New World and set up colonies was for the lumber because they had a big blue water navy and they had all these ships made out of wood and they'd cut down all their wood to make coal for their, for their industries and also, and not coal, charcoal for their industries and also to make ships and to make mine shafts with wood, supporting the tunnels and all this stuff. They cut down all their trees. So they had to, so even when we were 600 million people, we'd probably overshot in a big way. And if you want to go back far enough to find when the world was still somewhat pristine and we hadn't cut down all the forests in Europe, then maybe there was 250 million people on the planet. Now, just using round figures, 200 million people is what? Much less than 5% of the population. Yeah, about that. 10% of the current population would be 800 million, and 1% of the current population would be 80 million. So 200 million people, maybe 240 million people is like 3% of the current population. So if you go back far enough, when there's no fossil fuel consumption and we hadn't cut down all the trees and we hadn't destroyed everything else, then we were maybe about 250 million people, 3% of the current population. So if you get rid of fossil fuels today, not only do you not have your artificial fabrics and your artificial light and your artificial technology, you also don't have 8,000 million people because that's where they came from. They came from fossil fuels. They've been eating basically fossil fuels. We use the fossil fuels to make excess food, modern agriculture, big ag, big tractors, big fertilizer, big pesticides, big transportation, big processing, all this stuff. We make all this food and we bag it up and we send it to all corners of the earth and we feed all these thousands of millions of people, and that has to stop. And you're going to lose 97% of the population just on the way back to being solar powered. And I don't mean solar panels. I mean sunlight on pastures and the animals eating the food and then you eating the animals. Solar powered. That's it. That's all we really have is solar power. We get rid of fossil fuels, all we have is solar power. But we're not getting rid of fossil fuels because it's going to hurt. It's going to cause fatalities. It's going to kill 97% of the people on Earth. I just did the math. Without fossil fuels, all you have is solar power. I mean, the sunlight striking the pasture, feeding the animals. Okay, that kind of thing, which goes back thousands of years, that sort of relationship with the sun. If that's all you have, then all you have is 250 million humans on Earth, because that's about what we could do historically without fossil fuels and without cutting down all the forests on the planet. 250 million people. That's it. 3% of the current population. So we just can't face it. No one wants to be the person. No one wants to be the group of people who pulls the trigger on ending fossil fuels. It's not going to happen. And I accept that. We will never pass a treaty that restricts anyone's access to fossil fuels. We will only pass treaties at best. I mean, the best case scenario is we pass a treaty that gives more people access to fossil fuels so that they can also have a comfortable life. And what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that. That should have been done 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we should have been paying more attention to how people's quality of life is, which I would suggest also means respecting their indigenous cultures and helping them to maintain their way of life. Because for wherever they're living, whatever little valley they live in, whatever little river they have, whatever mountainside they're clinging to, that lifestyle, if that's what they want, that is fragile. And you could come through with dynamite and bulldozers and remove that mountainside. You could come through with pesticides and tractors and destroy that meadow and completely clear cut and plant corn and put sheep there or whatever. And then those people can't live there anymore. I mean, if you want to respect people, respect how they're living and ask them, do you want to live this way? Because you kind of don't have to. If you want to live differently, I guess that's okay. And, we're all living differently. The English today don't live the way the English did during medieval feudal times, right? They don't. Do they want to go back to that? Probably not. So if they don't want to go back, why do we force anybody else to go back? You can go forward with us if you want to. You don't have to live on the side of this cliffside. You don't have to live on the edges of this little river and that's all you've got. We could have 100 years ago brought everybody along who wanted to come along. We could have done that fairly and equitably. We could have done that with an eye on cultural sensitivity, justice. Okay, we could have made everyone the same offer. We could have done that, but we didn't. We did not. That would have been a thing, but we did not do that thing. And now that the Earth is basically human life on Earth as we know it is now completely endangered. Uh, Now we're going to do it. We're going to save the Bushmen of the Kalahari from, climate change. Now we're going to do that. Well, all you can do then is get them into the cities where they can have air conditioning because it's going to be too hot. Can't live there anymore. But we are going to end our reliance on fossil fuels. It's going to end for everyone. It's going to end for everyone at the same time. Now, I say everyone. Throughout this discussion, I'm going to implicitly and right now explicitly omit the elites. Now, by elites, I don't mean Americans, although America is a bunch of elitist. I won't be mean. Probably 1% of the population, of the Earth's population. That's 80 million people. Come close to being the elites. But 80 million, that's a lot of people. And you come closer to the real answer if you say 1/10 of 1% of the global population constitutes the elites. So that's 8,000. That's 8 million people. That's 1/10 of 1% of the global population is 8 million people. That's still a lot of people, right? You could actually just as a thought experiment, you could actually lose. You could have a die-off of 99.9% of the human population in the absence of fossil fuels, which is not entirely out of the question. Remember, a 97% die-off is probably unavoidable. So a 99.9% die-off isn't that big of a departure from what's probably inevitable, and yet you still have 8 million people. Wow. Oh, and that's the elites, right? The 8 million people. They got all the money, they got all the power, they got all the influence, they got all the answers. And sure, why not? Yeah, 8 million people, absolutely. Yeah, they'll be fine. So there's 8 million people out there who are absolutely going to be fine. 8 million people, that's a lot of people, but that's still only 1/10 of 1% of the current population. So for everything I'm about to say, does not apply to those people. They will have whatever else happens in this galaxy, apart from a supernova of the sun turning the earth to ashes. Those people, those 8 million people, will always have fossil fuels and their derivatives. They will always have modern medicine, modern transportation, modern lighting, modern space exploration, right? They'll have the internet, they'll have the pharmaceuticals, every kind of drug you can imagine. They'll have artificial intelligence, they'll have robot servants, they'll have everything. Those 8 million people will have everything. Everything. Diamonds on every finger, diamonds on their toes, everything. They'll have so much wealth that wealth won't even matter anymore. They'll just walk down the street handing $500 bills to little children, so the little children can make paper airplanes out of them and throw them at each other and have fun. They'll have everything imaginable, everything they have now, plus everything you have now, plus everything that will ever be invented by anyone ever forever. They will have it. That's 8 million people. The rest of this discussion addresses the other 99.9%. We can't have fossil fuels. We cannot have fossil fuels. It's as simple as that. And the Kyoto Protocols isn't going to address that. The Paris Climate Accords isn't going to address that. Nowhere during all the COPs, we're up to 28. I guess we'll be to 38 and 48 before the end comes. And none of that is going to deal with you and my access to fossil fuels. Never, ever, ever, ever. And yet you're not going to have fossil fuels. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's grow this channel, shall we? Let's get more people in on this misery, right? Or on this truthfulness, whatever you want to call it. Spread the horror. The horror is you are not going to have fossil fuels, because if you have fossil fuels and you keep burning them, going to Starbucks to get your latte, stupid shit like that, then the elites over here, the 1/10 of 1%, can't have diamond rings on every finger, okay? Because the planet is uninhabitable. So, something's going to have to give. Now, getting back to chaos, the Earth dynamic system is perfectly capable of murdering us. This planet by itself is perfectly capable of whacking us out of existence. I don't think that's what the elites want to have happen, though, because they don't want to be whacked out of existence. Am I right? You know I'm right. So instead, something needs to happen to get us off of fossil fuels. But that something is not going to come out of any bunch of people getting together and holding hands and swapping wives and doing all the things they do in order to make a decision and votes and treaties and enforcement and the UN and the Illuminati and the lizard people and all the other conspiracies to get us off of fossil fuels. That's not going to be the mechanism. The mechanism by which you and I and everyone around us, except the 8 million people in the planet who count, the mechanism to get us off of fossil fuels will be chaos. Chaos. And not the good kind. So right now, politically, economically, all around the world, you see the diffusion of chaos into daily life. There are agents of chaos, people who simply don't care. And maybe they never cared. Maybe they're mentally ill. Maybe they see chaos as a way to power. Maybe they see chaos as the will of God. I don't know what their problems are, but they're agents of chaos. They're bringing chaos. They're bringing it in. I guess we're bored and we're going to work with the chaos now. And the danger of chaos, the problem with chaos is that it is antithetical. It is the enemy of our global civilization. Chaos will destroy global civilization. And when you destroy global civilization, you stop consuming fossil fuels. So you got chaos coming in, destroys globalization, ends the consumption of fossil fuels. That's how this is going to work. That's my prediction. Chaos is coming in fast and strong. Right-wing politics, left-wing politics. We've got students taking over the universities. It starts at the top, it'll go all the way down. Pretty soon we'll have toddlers taking over the daycare. Not a joke. We have people armed to the teeth. We have Houthi rebels, stopping the shipping in the Red Sea. We have pirates off of Somalia and off of Yemen, taking ships and taking their crews and taking their cargoes. China is on the verge of economic collapse. Their banking system is just a shit show, and of course it's all centrally planned, so they can always cut a bunch of heads off and maybe solve their problem, but only temporarily. Eventually, the rest of the world gives up on their banking system. The rest of the world pulls out of China, stops letting China manufacture our shit for us because we can't rely on them to do that correctly. So we friendshore, we reshore, and we abandon China to deal with their retarded shit, and they just blow up. Okay, there's chaos coming in from every direction. And what happens when China blows up? Well, they invade Taiwan because that sounds like a good idea. And what happens when South Korea starts having economic woes because China has tripped over its own shoelaces? Well, then North Korea invades South Korea because, hey, that sounds like a good idea. And China and Japan already has more old people than they have young people, so good luck with that. And and then China invades the Philippines, and and Yemen invades Saudi Arabia, and Iran uses a nuke on Saudi Arabia, and Israel uses nukes on everybody, and everybody uses nukes on Israel. And pretty soon there's no oil flowing, and the supply chains are collapsed, and the food supply starts to collapse. And we realize all of a sudden that all of this stuff that we thought was eternal and forever and sacred was all propped up by fossil fuels and distant supply chains, and it all comes crashing down in a week. It all comes crashing down in a week. I read 3 installments of this story that I've been writing. Uh, I'm up. I could do another installment in episode 4. I've just been consumed with other things. I haven't been thinking about doing that, but I will do that shortly. I'll do an episode 4. The key to it is that, spoilers, although if you've been on the channel, there won't be. At the beginning, the reason why it happens the way it happens, and the reason why there's a story at all, is because the global supply chain simply collapse, basically overnight, within a few weeks. And there's, nuclear exchanges, and then the oil stops flowing, and then things catch fire, and no one really knows what happened. And all of a sudden, the service stations have no fuel. And the truck drivers stop delivering food to the supermarkets. And then people panic, and they loot the markets and destroy them. And now there's no place for the food to be delivered to. And it's just like within a week, everything bad that could happen happens, because it was all held together by just a series of agreements and contracts, all of which can be broken. And the first person breaks a contract over here, causes 10 other contracts to be broken, and those 10 contracts are broken. Now there's 1,000 contracts elsewhere that are broken as a result, and it's like a nuclear chain reaction. It just goes critical. And the thing about chain reactions is when they go critical, it's slow at first, and then it's exponential. It's happening slowly. You're wondering what's happening, and then wham, everything goes off at once. It's chaos. It's chaotic. We're holding all of this together on behalf of 8,000 million people. We're holding all of this together, all of this bubble gum and glue and string, holding it all together. And if it starts to break, the whole thing breaks. Because every gear is reliant on 5 other gears. And every machine is reliant on thousands of other machines. And all of it is turned and winding and geared and belted together and all these moving parts because of fossil fuels, which we cannot have. But the problems with global climate change and global heating can set off the chain reaction. Global heating, which is the thing that we're afraid of, while we're trying to get off of fossil fuels and not doing it, the global heating that results is itself the trigger of the chain reaction that drives everything else to annihilation in an exponential fashion. So we're talking about chaos. Let's talk about some chaotic things happening to you in the very near future. And by near future, I mean next week. Literally next week, maybe the month after. It gets hot somewhere. (125°F) in Thailand. Hot. That was a headline last week. How about, 150°F in Pakistan? That was a headline last year. This year should be even hotter. It gets hot somewhere. A whole region becomes really hot. And then in that whole region where people just can't cope, they die. In a random way. This person dies, and then that person, and then because this person was the only earner in the family, then the whole family dies, and then there's all these families that don't have income, and then they're refugees, and they're trying to find food and water. It's so hot, they're trying to get away from the heat, and then they die on the road, and then there's all these bodies, and then there's all this disease, and then there's chaos in the city and there's chaos in the capital, and pretty soon all these people are leaving, and the rich ones get on airplanes and fly to other countries, and they take all their money with them, and they take all their purchasing power with them. The politicians, or among the rich people, they get on the planes and they leave too. Pretty soon there's no sitting government. There's nobody who can do anything. There's the army, but those people, they're scrambling around looking for food and water, and things start to break down, and pretty soon the power goes down in the heat, and there's nobody left to fix it, because the people who have the knowledge to do this are also the country's elites. And what did they do the week before? They got on airplanes and went into other countries where they had food and water. And so that country fails. That country completely fails in the heat. That country fails, whichever one it is. Thailand, Pakistan, Oman, Yemen, who knows? Probably some country that's already having problems, but it could be some country that isn't. What if it's India, or a big part of India? What if a big part of India just collapses in the heat? What if Pakistan collapses in the heat, and then the people from Pakistan swarm over the border into India, which used to be where they lived? They swarm over the border into India looking for food and water, and the Indian government, a bunch of nationalists under Modi, meet them at the border and shoot them, kill them. And now the Pakistani military, which is the only thing running the country, all of a sudden they lose their shit because their people are being murdered on the border. All they're looking for is food and water, and they're being murdered on the border by the Indians. And so the Pakistanis lob rockets into India, and pretty soon India's lobbing rockets back into Pakistan. And now we have a regional war, and they're both nuclear powers. And how long do you think it is before one of them starts shooting off nuclear weapons, or both of them? Oh, it's just India and Pakistan. Who cares? Yeah, well, global supply chains, right? How much technology comes out of India? How much technology goes into India? What happens when 10% of the population, 140 million people, because they have a lot of people, right? 140 million people, 10% of the population, the elites, the upper middle class, 10% of the population leaves. There's been a nuclear exchange. They get on every conveyance they can find. There's not even enough flights. They have to get on boats. And they just leave. They just show up in other countries. Now you got 140 million people who just fled a war zone, a nuclear war zone. They just fled that place. And now they're showing up in other countries. And they need services. They need food, water, shelter, clothing, all of it. They need political support. They need asylum. They need everything. They're not going to get it. They're not going to get any of it. They're not going to get anything they need. They're going to have suitcases full of money. They're not going to be able to get anything they need. Nothing. And then services start to break down in the host countries. And people are resentful. Who are these Indians? Why are they here? Shouldn't they be in India? They got their own subcontinent. What are they doing here? Well, don't you remember in the news? There was a nuclear exchange with Pakistan. And now the Indians and the Pakistanis both are scattering to the four corners of the earth. And they're showing up, and they're having all these needs. And now there's all these riots. All these Indian people are in the streets. Bless their hearts. And they're not getting the treatment that they think they deserve. And they don't have food, water, clothing, shelter. They're refugees, but they've got money. All they want is to be treated fairly. And they can't even get that because, well, what else is new? So they bring problems to their host countries. They just all showed up within a week or two of each other. And they're all there at the same time. They all came in on airplanes. They all came in with money. They all came in with aspirations to make a new life for themselves. And they can't. And they can't go home because the global heating isn't going away. Neither is the war, nor are the nuclear weapons, nor is the fallout, nor is the anything else, nor is the death, nor is the disease. The country, that whole region has failed. So now they have to go someplace else. This is completely chaotic. No one expected any of this. It's political chaos. It's economic chaos. No one was ready for this. And now these host countries, I mean, why do you think Britain did the whole Brexit thing? Because they didn't want to deal with refugees coming into the EU. They said, oh, yeah, well, we're not going to deal with these people. They're yours. And the EU said, yeah, well, you're part of the EU. You have to deal with these people. You have to have your quota of people who come to the EU seeking economic and political advantages. And you have to take some of them because you're part of the EU. So they got out. And they're still getting out. 8 years later, they haven't quite figured out that whole dumpster fire. But that's why they got out. And about the same time, we got Donald Trump. Same reason. People were terrified of all these people coming in. We still talk about it in this country. Donald Trump was saying he's going to deport 11 million people back to their home countries as soon as he's president. Really? You're going to do that? Well, who's going to pick the strawberries or anything else that you're growing? Who's going to pick the fruits? Who's going to pick the vegetables? Who's going to build your housing? Because you ain't doing any of that shit. Donald Trump or anyone that looks like you haven't picked a strawberry in 100 years. We bring in imported labor for that. So now you're going to, because you're afraid of all these refugees coming in from all these war-torn and climate-torn countries, you're going to deport everybody and close your borders and make America white again, or whatever you plan on doing, whatever it is. It's his agenda, not mine. Whatever he plans on doing, and you're going to do that. Well, that's going to introduce chaos. You can't even start to think. Most Americans aren't smart enough to be able to run out all the scenarios of what that's going to do when you deport 11 million people because you're afraid. When you don't let people come in, or when as soon as they come in, then you start rounding them up and putting them in internment camps. You have no idea where that's going to lead. We are entering a period of advancing and aggravating chaos. And just as we saw with the COVID-19, which was a little dress rehearsal for the importance of chaos and how our systems work, as soon as you start injecting chaos at the edges, failures of governments over here, failure of economic systems here, breaking supply chains, interest rates are too high for too long, bank failures, right? Fear, anxiety, animosity. I got mine. I don't know where yours is. As soon as you start injecting all of this with chaos, the system falls apart. That's the system that's keeping us all alive, folks. It's called global industrialized civilization. That thing, that the goose that laid all the golden eggs, that's the thing that we're about to tear apart. And we can't stop that. We are going to do that. Chaos is going to come in from the edges. It is doing so already. There are no voices against this. Look at the U.S. Congress. Is there any element of the U.S. Congress that is anti-chaos? No. They're almost entirely chaos agents. There are very few, if any, voices of moderation in the U.S. Congress, the most powerful governing body on the planet is being overwhelmed by chaos. It is political chaos, but it doesn't matter. It is not the mathematical kind of chaos. It's political chaos, but it doesn't matter. And it has its own strange attractors. It has its own things that seem to pull everything gravitationally to it. And those aren't going away ever, probably forever. That's generational change to get rid of those nuisances that are bringing everybody into strange orbits. All of it is chaotic because a lot of those influences that are moving people around, those people won't know where they're going to end up. They think they're on a trajectory, and you think they're on a trajectory, but this is a chaotic system. And all you know is you're in motion. People are in motion, and they're doing things, and they're interacting in strange, chaotic ways. And this whole thing, these chaotic interactions, these chaos agents, this unexpected, unanticipated changes, all are being whipped and driven by global heating and climate change, which is also chaotic in its own way, is going to bring down the global industrialized civilization that's keeping 8,000 million people alive and in place. And when those people start to move around, and when those politics start to become aggravated and inflamed, and when those economic systems become endangered, and when those supply chains start to crumble and crack, and when the Houthis are shooting rockets, and the Israelis are shooting rockets, and the Pakistanis are shooting rockets, and the Saudis are shooting rockets, and the Russians rocket, and the North Koreans rocket, and China rockets Taiwan, and South Korea rockets North Korea, and the America rockets Canada, right? Nothing's off the table here. Then it all collapses. And this thing that collapses, this globalized, industrialized civilization built on hundreds of years of the consumption of fossil fuels, when it collapses, it's gone forever. There's no way to rebuild that. We built that over hundreds, if not thousands of years. We built it. One little innovation, one little political, uh, 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 you know, investment at a time. We built this thing slowly. Treaties and laws and agreements and wars that helped solve certain other problems, right? Like imperialism and the Cold War. We fought all these wars, had to go through that, and then all that was sorted out, and then we had some relative periods of peace, and that meant China could industrialize, and that meant Korea could industrialize, and finally in this little peace, we really took off, a big moonshot, consuming fossil fuels and innovating our asses off and creating the internet and creating Amazon and all this, the UN, EU, all this stuff, fossil fuels. And now it's all falling apart. It's all falling apart. And some people say, oh, well, that's just the fourth turning. Oh, well, that's inevitable. Okay, well, it can be inevitable. That's fine. I don't have a theory on that. But once it's gone, folks. And all that will be left of it, the last vestiges of all this will be the exclusive domain of 8 million people, 1/10 of 1% of the current population. That doesn't mean there's going to be a huge die-off until there's only 8 million people, although I won't rule it out. I could easily imagine a scenario where that actually happens. Not hard at all. Not difficult at all. I'm writing the book, right? It's been 100 days. That's the title of the book. I'm writing that book. And I've gotten to a point in the book where the narrator is looking around and asking, where is everybody? Where'd they go? Why'd they go? Can't even find the bones. Where is everybody? Yep. Could happen. Could. Can't rule it out. A 97% die-off is actually not even negotiable. And why stop at 97%? Why not go to 99%? Why not go to 99.9%? Why stop anywhere? So people are saying we could have a complete extinction of the human species. Well, maybe. Chaos. My wife is calling me, so I'm going to answer the phone. We will end this here, and next time maybe I'll be reading something.